Hello everyone, John Cope here again from Cope Racing Transmissions, and this video we're going to talk about loose torque converter bolts. It seems like for whatever reason Chrysler guys are haunted with loose torque converter bolts. I'm going to go over a few things about converter bolts, about converter covers, about indexing torque converters to flex plates, and loose converter bolts. I think sometimes a lot of these issues are self-inflicted. As a Mopar guy, me racing my whole life, ever since I was a kid on the street, I've never, not once, ever had converter bolts come loose. But I get it a lot from people who email me or call me. I spent a little bit of time on the phone last night with a customer who has been having this problem so often that he was spot welding the converter bolts to the flex plate. So I'm going to grab the camera. I'm going to get a little bit closer. I'm going to go into some detail of what I think you may be doing, and this may help you guys with both a little bit knowledge of the torque converters on how they line up the flex plates and about breaking or having your converter bolts coming loose. I got here the billet front cover from my 9.5 inch converters that PTC builds for us. I have a flex plate for a Gen 3 Hemi. I have 2 converter bolts, some Loctite, and 2 wrenches. The first thing I want to talk about is the wrenches. It's probably one of the biggest issues is not being, especially if you're a big block or you got a Gen 2 Hemi, it's hard to get to the converter bolts. So I recommend that you get the case access or notch the case so you can get to the converter bolts. You can't get a torque wrench in there. You can't get a socket in there. You can only get a wrench in there, even if you notch the bottom of the case for that to go. So I want to show you this wrench, and I don't know, I'm going to post some pictures up there while I'm talking, but what I did to this is I flat sanded both sides of this wrench until the drive or the hex is perfectly flat. If you look at a lot of wrenches, I'm not picking on Mac, but this one's a Mac, you can see how much room you have until the shank, the drive, actually is going to come in contact with the bolt. So if you're using ARP bolts, which I recommend that you do, you have to go in quite far for this to even come in contact with the head of the bolt. So by flat sanding or milling down your wrench, you're going to be able to get the flank or the drive of the wrench and on the head of the bolt completely, not just half of it. I see a lot of times that some of these bolts are rounded out because they're not getting a good bite. So I've had this torque converter wrench, I call it my Mopar torque converter wrench, for a long time. It's probably about 10 or 15 years old, maybe longer. I flat sand it, and what I do is when I go, I have the vehicle, I'm doing this left-handed. If I have the vehicle, the transmission in the vehicle, and I'm going to go to tighten the bolts, I always use the box end, and I get it on there, and when I go to tighten it, I actually use a hammer and bang on the bottom of this until it's tight, and then until it actually starts to rotate the motor in there. And then, I mean, it's not a torque spec, but there's no way to get a torque wrench on there. So the first tip is, and you know what, Craftsman are absolutely the worst when it comes to how thick the drive is right here on that. So flatten your wrench until it is, there is not, that it's, this area is all the way into the drive. So that way, when you put it on the fastener on the bolt, you're getting all of the drive of the wrench on the bolt. That is the number one tip. Make sure you do that. The number two tip. This is blue Loctite, but I recommend that you use red. If you read how this stuff works, if you ever notice, you ever take Loctite and pour it on the bench or leave the cap off, it never gets dry. And if you put too much Loctite on your bolt, it acts as a lubricant and not as a Loctite. I see guys dip these things in Loctite. That is incorrect. You're guaranteed your converter bolts are going to come loose if you drowned the torque converter bolt in Loctite. If you read the procedures and how this is supposed to work, once you put the Loctite on the bolt and put it in where it's going to go, it not having any air or oxygen is what cures this, the reaction that the Loctite goes through. So when you drown it, it just never cures because there's too much of it. So the second tip is use your red Loctite. Use one drop. I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, no man, if a little bit is good, more's got to be better. That's not the case. And that is probably the biggest reason why everybody has converter bolts coming loose. Now, like I said, it's never happened to me personally. I've had customers come in with their cars and have loose converter bolts. I think the biggest reason is they're not getting the torque to tighten them when they're putting the wrench on, and that they're using way too much Loctite. So that's tip number two. Finally, if you oblong the whole bolt holes from the converter bolts being loose, don't reuse the flex plate. Spend the money, get another flex plate, take my tips, and you should not have any issues. So that's tip number three. Depending how many times you guys take apart your car every year, these ARP bolts are 20 bucks. I use a brand new set every year if I take the transmission out. So if I put the transmission in the race car and I leave it in there for 2 years, then fine. When the transmission comes out for freshened, or I want to change gear ratios or do anything to the transmission, I always use a new set of ARP bolts. Don't go to the hardware store and buy cheap, generic bolts. Use a good quality race ARP bolt. And that doesn't matter if it's 5/16 or 7/16. Get good bolts, and you shouldn't have that problem. So that's everything you need to know about, or at least my tips, about loose converter bolts. If you have any comments, leave them down in the section below. All right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about indexing torque converters. These PTC billet 9.5 inch for Chrysler 727s and 904s have two bolt patterns. So it has the 90-degree bolt pattern, which means that's every bolt to the left. Is one bolt pattern, and the bolt pattern to the right is another bolt pattern. Chrysler in 94, 95, 96, I'm not sure when, went to a 90-degree bolt pattern, which means the bolt pattern is symmetrical. They're equal to each other. Every bolt is equal. So you can take this Gen 3 Hemi flex plate, which on my flex plates, these are the 90-degree bolt pattern. These are the offset bolt pattern. You can put that on 4 ways and it'll bolt up 4 different ways, because each bolt is exactly 90 degrees from each other. The offset is what Chrysler used from 1962 to 1996. and 3 of the bolts are 90 degree from each other, and one of them is offset. Chrysler did that because they had cast cranks and forged cranks. The cast cranks, the converters had weights on the converters, and so if you did not bolt the converter up correctly, it would cause an imbalance problem with the harmonic balancer, and you'd have a terrible vibration. So Chrysler was like, well, we're going to make these converters only bolt on one way. So that's why Chrysler used an offset bolt pattern from 62 to 96. I'm not exactly sure the exact year, but they did change it. And when they did change it, they went from putting the weights on the torque converter to putting the weights on the flex plate. So once the weights were on the flex plate will only bolt to the crank one way. So they didn't see no need to have an offset bolt pattern no more, and that's why they went to the 90 degree. So if you have a 96 and later, or Gen 3 Hemi, and you choose, you can actually, with this flex plate and bolt pattern, you can bolt this up 2 different ways, depending on which one you use. These though are the 5/16 holes for both patterns. These are the 7/16. So if you run a Gen 3 Hemi and you want to use 7/16, you will have to drill these 4 holes out for the fit. But if you didn't, if you had a B&M flex plate where it only has the offset in it, then you need to index the torque converter to the flex plate. So this way, when you're putting the torque converter to mate it to the flex plate, with that offset bolt pattern, it can only go on right one way, and it can go on wrong 3 ways. So indexing the torque converter is going to help you during the installation, not spin the converter and put the bolts in to find out, oh, that didn't work, this didn't work. If you index it, you'll find out life will be a lot easier for you. So we're just going to use this Gen 3 Hemi flex plate for an example. And we already know on the PTC 9.5s, by looking at the cover, the bolt pattern to the right is the offset. The bolt pattern to the left is a 90 degree. So these have 7/16 bolt holes. We're going to just simply put the bolts, the flex plate on there, and look at every single hole. As you can see, we're off. Okay, so that's not the bolt pattern. We go around, line up 2 of the holes, it's still off. So now we're going to put it here, go around again, it's lined up, lined up, lined up. Okay, so now it's indexed. You put a paint mark on the flex plate, put a paint mark on the torque converter, so that way when you spin the torque converter inside the transmission, you know it's going to go in there. So I hope this helped you guys. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. Our website is at coperacingtrans.com, which will be below. And if you guys want a catalog, go to my email and send me your name, your address, your city, state, and zip, and I'll send you a free catalog. If you live outside the country, we have a downloadable one. So I think that covered everything. If I missed something, let me know. If you have any questions, let me know. Put it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys. More power to you.